Hello, and welcome to My Book, a podcast about books and their authors with a South Asian touch. My Book podcast show has been produced by Parvez Alam and Achula Sharma for Cine Inc., a hub of podcasts based in London. I am Sangeeta Datta. We continue our journey discussing some of the most interesting books published recently. One of them is Shubhra Gupta's book on the brilliant actor Irrfan Khan, following his journey, struggles, and arrival in the world of Hindi cinema, Bollywood, and even beyond. In this episode, I'm going to be in conversation with Shubhra Gupta, who has written the book Irrfan, A Life in Movies, published by Macmillan.
Naseeruddin Shah himself actually talks about this. He says in his interview, he said, I had a very big ego. I would not go and audition. In the way he said it in an extremely sort of amusing manner, he didn't think Irrfan had all of those hang-ups. He said that he would actually probably go and audition, though his own manager in the book said that had come a point where Irrfan didn't have to audition. People were reaching out to him as Irrfan Khan. So I think Irrfan, of all the people, of all the Indian actors who had tried to become these crossover stars, he had got to the point where no one else had. And despite the fact that we have two top female stars today, we have both Deepika Padukone and Priyanka Chopra, who are got to the point where no one else has in the West, but they still have a long way to go before they can actually be approached as people who would do the kind of acting or the roles that Irrfan had got way before.
That was Shubhra Gupta. Delhi-based Shubhra Gupta is a writer, a film critic for many years with Indian Express. She is a recognized authority on Indian cinema. Shubhra, a warm welcome to our show, My Book.
Thank you, Sangeeta. It's lovely to be talking to you.
Shubhra, you're a senior film critic who's been writing on Indian cinema for decades. You now have this fascinating book on the late actor Irrfan Khan, one of the most gifted and special artists that inhabited our world of cinema and television. An actor who actually came from the outside and made this remarkable journey in this fiercely competitive and sort of normative world of Bollywood. An actor who's had this slow beginning, then a meteoric rise in the industry, who went on rapidly to become an international player, and ironically, sadly, made an exit just when things were beginning to look very exciting for him. My first question to you is about the book and what made you start work on this book.
It was, I think, at a time when we were still processing this tragic event that had happened. Just a month before he passed away, the world had gone into a lockdown of the kind of intensity that nobody had ever seen, because no one had ever heard of the virus COVID-19. No one had heard of a virus that could steal into your body from nowhere at all and steal your life away. At the same time, we were trying to process the things that were happening outside of our little spheres where we were locked into our own homes. And Irrfan's passing came as one of those cataclysmic, I think I would say, happenings. So it was like a double whammy. It was like such a horrible shock. Having said that, I must say that it was not as if we were not expecting it. He had been very, very sick for a year and a half before that. He had spoken publicly about his illness, and there were indications in between when he would suddenly pop up on a couple of times on social media where he would talk about the fact that he was going through this journey in that 1.5 years. When it felt like he would maybe beat this, because there have been other people who have beaten this kind of cancer. But every time that hope sort of went up, there was something that to deflate it. And I think when he passed, it was a horrible shock, but it was not something that we were not expecting. So I think a combination of all of these things felt like the world had come to an end, literally, when we heard of his passing. And I remember the outpouring of grief, Sangeeta. It was, I think the whole world came together. He was an extraordinary actor. And when my friend, who was the agent who was responsible for getting this book finally with the publishers. Her name is Mimi Chaudhary. She reached out to me and she said, "Why don't you do a book on Irfan?" And at that point of time, it was only a month after his passing, and I was a little bit reluctant, let me say. I wasn't very convinced. At that point, my friend Asim had written a book. The book that he had written, it was a traditional biography which had just come out about 3 or 4 months before he passed away. It had just come out. There were so many things that were being written on him or being planned. I wasn't really very sure whether I wanted to get into a volume which would be on Irfan, because I wasn't sure about how I would shape the book. But at that point, I think I stopped to consider about his extraordinary journey. And I'm using the word extraordinary more than once, and I'm using it very advisedly, because literally there is nobody in Hindi cinema today who can claim to have had the same journey as he did. So I think that got me thinking about how amazing it was that this person, this actor, this small town boy who came from a small, he came from Tonk in Rajasthan. He came to Delhi to the National School of Drama. And at that, somewhere there, he discovered his mojo. He discovered that he loved to act. And at that point, at some point, he decided that if he was going to be, he was born for cinema. I think he waited. He waited for almost 15 years from that moment at the National School of Drama to when he actually got his first big role. So I think I was looking back at his journey, and having seen some of his work in television and having seen everything he's done in cinema, I figured that yes, I think it is a worthwhile endeavor to look at Irfan, to encapsulate his journey, to look at how this actor, performer, star had changed or was about to do something, extraordinary with Hindi cinema. And it, as you said in your introduction, it was at that very point when he was at the tipping point. When he
Yeah.
passed away,
Yeah.
he would have changed so many things. Not that he did not. He had already
He'd
begun doing
already
it.
started.
He'd
Yeah.
already started doing all of that. But I think if he had been alive today, I think the trajectory of what we call stardom would definitely have been a different thing altogether.
You know what you're saying it's really reminding me, and I'm recalling the days that I met Irfan several times in that 1 year when he was being treated here in London. And we would quite often meet at a friend's place, sometimes in the evening and sometimes in the afternoon. And I'm recalling that sunlit terrace where we would sit and talk. And I'd met him before as well. And again, something which I found so striking about a man who'd already become an international star. He was an international player. People knew him through his films in the West as well. And he would always be so quiet. He'd be funny, of course, but he'd also be so quiet and reclusive. And I always got that sense that he was alert and self-aware, and he was taking stock of things around him, but he wasn't necessarily getting involved, nor did he want a big hue and cry about him being the star in the center of the room. So there are so many people who've spoken about the fact that the space that he occupied was not always center space. It was somewhere in the borders, and he would have his own world there. He could be sitting under a tree during a break in the shooting
Yes,
time and the filming time, and he
yes.
loved nature. So there are many other things which will come up. But also with you, Shubhra, did you have occasion to meet him? Was he a friend, or were you coming to him sheerly out of your interest in his work and the merit of his work?
That's a very easy thing to answer. I met him once, and I met him as a journalist on a beat. I was basically a film critic, and I was a journalist. He was shooting, and we met while in the middle of that shoot. And it wasn't exactly a long conversation. We said hello to each other. He knew who I was. I knew his work. At that point of time, he hadn't become this big star, hadn't become the Irfan that became someone that many people knew. He was still at that point somebody who was still in a niche, I would say.
Hmm.
Still, he was people who knew, they knew. that this was the guy to watch out for. But he hadn't gone big. He hadn't done his big ticket, either his Hollywood movies or his Bollywood films. And it was a very strange kind of meeting, because as a critic, I do believe that there has to be distance between the work of the person that I'm critiquing, and I'm very, very involved with their work. I draw the line between the personal and the professional. So for me to have no, I don't think I'm a friend of anybody's. I always tell people that I'm very friendly, but I'm not your friend. So that's one of the things that I think is something that I've always lived by. So yes, I do remember that one meeting with Irfan, very striking persona, because he was much taller than I thought he would be. I do recall being extremely struck by the way he looked. I thought he was an extremely handsome man, and I think he had great sex appeal, both things together. And we met for barely those few minutes, and he was called back to do on the shot, and then I had to leave. The reason why I did this book is not because of my knowing or not knowing him as a person, but I think it is more to do with the fact that he was one of the few people, few actors or few performers whose work I almost always looked forward to. I thought he would surprise me. I thought he would give me that little thing that we all look for as professionals who've been involved in doing what we do for the longest time. Um, I'm not impressed by actors who call attention to their craft, or who sort of say, "Hey, look at me, I'm this great actor." Irfan never did that. He didn't have to do that. He internalized that role in a manner that felt that he hadn't. It felt unrehearsed, but I think he really worked very hard at it before he came on to do the shot. I think he had it all planned. And then, as many people in the book have said, that he would do all of this, and then it was almost like he would forget everything. He would be like someone for the first time in front of a camera, and he would deliver every single time. And that's why there would be that surprise, that little moment of, oh, okay, I haven't seen someone do that before, or I haven't seen Irfan do that before. And how does that little difference, that little differential that he built into that role.
The way you structured the book, it's a series of conversations with his family, with his wife to start with, and then with his directors and his co-stars. So there's a lot of industry voices coming into this, and giving us a very diverse way of looking at this talent, this magnificent talent, really. So what I take away from this book, I feel the most precious bit is, on one side, how it builds up the sense of him being a human, the humanity in Irfan, which is so prized and possessed by his friends and the people who knew him. And on the other side, his craft, the manner in which he came to acting, of course, with a sense of preparation, but how he would also cast away that prep when he walked in front of the camera. More than one voice has talked about this. So you've spoken to a very wide range of people here. And I find in your introduction, what's really interesting is the way in which you give the broader narrative, because you place him in a certain context and you tell us about what was really happening during those years that Irfan struggled. So the other three Khans are superstars in Bollywood or in Hindi cinema. They're the ones who are ruling the roost. And how tough it was for someone who didn't quite fit the narrative in terms of appearance, in terms of location, coming in as an outsider, as a person who also did not want to do the conventional running around trees and romancing the heroine, and who wanted to stick to his guns and do other things, do new things every time, how difficult it was and how he cracked that. So tell us a little bit about that, because for the larger audience, it's really interesting and important to contextualize the scene into which Irfan came in.
Okay, wow, that's like when Irfan came into, let's say, when he was trying to look for work, television was the thing that actually was in front of him. It was there, it was available, he was there and he was available. So that kind of thing, I think, was easier to walk into television at that time, in the early 90s, because Doordarshan's days of of being the only act in town were over. 1993, ZTV came into India. It was the Gulf War, and this was the first private television channel which came in. And within a couple of years after that, we had Star TV, we had Sony. So there were three conglomerates turned up, and they all, and television, as you know, is a relentless beast. It needs what now is called content, which is a word that I do not really approve of, but I'm using it here just for expedience sake. They were looking for new content, they were looking for new faces, they were looking for people who would give them new ways of telling stories. So the storytelling aspect of the, let's say, television fiction was looking for people who would be able to put together for their new audience something new. It would not be a Doordarshan kind of way of telling stories, which we had been seeing for 20 years and we were very, very tired of. That when these new channels came in, there was suddenly a flurry. I remember there was a flurry of excitement in the industry that here was a space that was looking for people, and it was also a space that could be colonized by people who were looking to do something different. So that's how I think television became his first port of call, when he began really to look around himself after having finished with National School of Drama. He and Sutapa, his wife, came to Bombay, having already got a conversation going with Govind Nihalani, who had already cast Irrfan in Drishti and in a couple of other films, and Sutapa was working on the editorial side of it. So they came thinking that it's the industry is going to be like as welcoming as anything else, and they were young, they thought that they had the talent to actually crack all the walls that were around them. But I think what Irfan did not realize, that Hindi cinema at that time was still in the grip of the old way of functioning, where the formulaic offerings were lost and found. The children were lost in Kumbh Melas, and they were found at the end of 3.5 hours after 6 songs and 7 dances, was still pretty much the norm. And there was really nothing that Irfan could do in this during this time. So he filled his time. He never lacked work. That is something I do want to emphasize, and that is something that is being emphasized through the book. He never lacked for work. Everybody knew that he was a talented, very, very super talented actor in their midst. They reached out to him, but the ease with which TV reached out to him, television producers reached out to him, was something that was both gratifying to him, but it became a double-edged sword very soon after, because he got tired of doing this very, very standard procedure kind of acting that was demanded of him. They wanted him to cry loudly, they wanted him to laugh loudly, they wanted him to do everything that that was standard, that was dull, it bored him. Now that is something that if you read the book, how terrified he was of boredom. His own wife talks about it. There are many colleagues who talk about it, and in this manner where he says, "ये मत कराओ मुझसे, ये मुझसे नहीं होगा, कुछ और कराओ." So मेरे character को मार दो. He actually even pleaded with the I forget. I think it was maybe Chandrakanta or one of these sort of serials that he was in. He said, "Please kill my character because I can't deal with it anymore." And they actually did, but he was so popular that they brought him back as his twin brother. As his twin brother, and he, Sutapa was laughing when she spoke about that, but she also recalls how tough it was. Those days were very, very difficult for him. And I think at that point, a very fortuitous thing happened. A woman called Shailja Kejriwal, whom I have spoken to in the book, who turned out to be very good friends with both Irfan and with Sutapa. At that point of time, she joined Star TV, and they created a slot called Star Bestsellers, which was based on literary works that they were like famous literary works. And so she created this slot, and she reached out to people in the industry who were just coming in from film school. They were coming in from National School of Drama. They were hungry for work, and here was this opportunity to actually create something that was original and something that would be as Anurag Basu said, हमारी भूख मिटाना. हम लोग बहुत भूखे थे उस समय. तो हमारी जो फिल्म की जो भूख थी वो थोड़ी उससे मिट गई. All of them, Anurag Basu, Anurag Kashyap, Sri Ram Raghavan, Anup Singh, Tigmanshu Dhulia, you name them, and they all were part of the bestseller roster. And the joke that Shailja sort of recalled with the smile in her own voice when she was talking about this period is that it became known as Irfan's bestsellers, because everybody wanted to act with him.
Yes.
And he was saying, yes, I am here. Yes, I am here. He didn't say no. And they all reached out to him. So I think 6 or 7 of those bestsellers turned out to have Irfan in central roles. And it became this complete, it was a sensation that people have forgotten because it was so long back. It was 1999. But I remember the ferment and the excitement of what that thing did, that one slot with these actors and with these characters. Imtiaz Ali was also part of
Yes,
that.
he was also
So
there.
yeah, so also part of it. So I think
interestingly, this period that you're talking about, it's the sort of time that I moved from Bombay to London, and they were not accessible to us. So we didn't get to see these bestsellers. And it's so interesting that you've given it so much of historical importance in this cultural history. And for us, I think we noticed him, of course, in The Namesake, and sitting here in Britain and at the BFI with the premiere of Asif Kapadia's The Warrior.
Warrior. I
That
was going to
the
come to
big
that.
film. That was
Yes.
where you actually saw this brooding face
Yes.
and the way he
Yes.
was lit and the way he performed, and just the image of Irfan as an international image. That's what emerged for us for the first time.
Right. In fact, I was leading to that when I was said that, after the first season of Star Bestsellers, when everybody, all of these people were all geared to work for the second, the channel shut it down because there were no sponsors. Because, it was both a good thing and a bad thing. I would say that if it had continued, maybe none of these people would have found their groove in the movies. But because it did, they were all catapulted into this wilderness, literally, where they were having to look for work. And at that point of time, Irfan had become so unhappy with the way things were going, where he was looking for good work, nothing was coming his way. And then Tigmanshu Dhulia, his National School of Drama mate, and also the casting director on The Warrior, reached out to him and said that there is this film called The Warrior, and Asif Kapadia is looking for the central role, and would you like to do it? And Irfan's reaction, according to Sutapa, was, a warrior? Me? How will I do that? So I think Tigmanshu did a little bit of persuading. They went off and met Asif, and Sutapa talked about how she asked him to wear his lucky black shirt, which he did. And whether it was that or whether something about the meeting went, there was a click, and The Warrior came to be. And then actually that became his calling card in the West. And in everywhere the film went, people wanted to know, who's that guy? And I think that really was the question that he wanted everyone to be asking, who's that guy? So here he was that guy. But it took, even after that, even 2001 when The Warrior came out, between that and 2003 when Haasil came out, Tigmanshu's own film, in which he played Ranvijay, the Allahabad Kalonda, in which he was a full gunda in that one. And in Bollywood's terminology, he was playing a negative character. But if you see that film, he's a character. He's neither negative he does stuff which is not very it would not be sort of acceptable in civil society. But never at any point do you feel that he is like a Gabbar Singh. Though a couple of people said कि उसका जो character था ना वो गब्बर के बराबर था. I mean, he was like, he really sort of inhabited that role with the hunger of someone who was just waiting for something like that to happen. And I think Haasil was that role that he was waiting for. And within 6 months, there was Maqbool, which was Vishal Bhardwaj's adaptation of Macbeth. And his playing of Maqbool is, like, I think, magnificent. There has been, out of all the films that I know that I love of Irfan, Maqbool and Haasil both actually are very high up there.
You're listening to My Book, a podcast about books and their authors with me, Sangeeta Datta. My Book podcast show is produced by London based digital media house Cine Inc. I welcome you back to my conversation with Shubhra Gupta, the author of Irrfan, A Life in the Movies, published by Macmillan Publications in Delhi. The book is a series of conversations with Irfan's family, his principal directors and co actors, and some big players in the industry and beyond. To continue with you, Shubhra, I must say that Irfan, as I said, I remember him only from that point, The Warrior and Maqbool. And what you notice is his immaculate sense of timing, the understated manner of surprising the audience. But most importantly, what Shyam Benegal has called in your book, he calls it the X factor, the fact that when he is on screen, you really notice nothing else. He grabs all your attention. Vishal Bhardwaj talks of his preparation, Mira Nair talks of his high craft, and Cameron Bailey, the director of the film festival, talks of his great sense of interiority. Do you also feel as he grows on you as a viewer, and then you're hooked and hungry for more?
I think there is really no other way to answer that question but to say yes, yes, yes. I absolutely, you've just put that thing so beautifully that he really, whenever he came on screen, he never did anything that was expected. He was not one of those guys who, sort of exit left and enter right. He was not that guy. He was always someone who would take that scene, turn it around, and sometimes you would, in fact, got to the point where you would say, "Acha, calm down. Okay, we know you can do this. Let's maybe come back to something which could be like a straightforward delivery." But having said that, again, I would say that joy of watching an actor like him perform is that that he is coming up with emotions and feelings which are very relatable. He was not a predictable actor at all, and that I think is a boon for someone like me who thirsts for people who can just please just surprise me. That's
Yeah.
all you need to do. You need to come onto the screen. You don't need to do anything. Don't charm me. Don't beguile me. Just give me that surprise. Give me that little thing where I say, oh, okay, I didn't know that moment existed. I didn't know that you could do it, and I didn't know that this could happen after this. Small little things, but it
Yeah.
really adds up into a full-bodied a role and the kind of a creation of a person that you hadn't seen before.
Mhm.
So I think that to me is very precious, and I think Irfan did that really well, almost always. Yeah, he managed to
I
surprise
can
me.
understand that as a film critic, you do this as your profession and you're watching content all the time. So, for somebody to really surprise you, for somebody to really motivate you to ask for more, has to be
Hmm.
someone exceptional. And of course, he was that exceptional. I really stopped to think whether we should call him an actor because he was an artist in the true sense of the term. There was something inspiring about him, something inspired about him. And I also want you to comment on the fact that he really drew on life. He drew on his own life journey, which shaped his belief in diversity, his quite evolved views on politics and religion. He drew on reality, and he was searching for new stories always with that hunger to do more and to do his best. So someone remarks that he was humble and proud at the same time, that he knew he was better than most. With a shy smile on his face, he was assessing things around him at the same time. What would you say about this sense of self awareness, the sense that, even Mira Nair says this, that he knew he had something in him and he was not going to let fritter it away. He was
Yes.
not going to let it go on roles that he didn't believe in or work that he didn't believe in.
Yes. So I think it's self evident that what Irfan did in these 30 years of working steadily towards some kind of pinnacle. I mean, we can look at it from the outside and say that, oh, his journey was first he did this, then he did this, then he did this. But when you're an actor and you're a professional and you're seeking good work, and filmmaking is one of those professions which is never linear. you are doing something at some point, and then you come back, and then maybe you come circle back to it
Yeah.
again. So you cannot actually assess where you are on that spectrum. It is the other person who's actually looking at you, looking at your work, looking at the full, at the full person that you are. That an actor is the only one that all of us can possess, because we know what that person did. And
Mm.
sometimes even an actor doesn't have any idea how he came upon that moment. It's sometimes it's magical, sometimes it's serendipitous, sometimes it's just, if you ask an actor to do that same thing over again, you're probably not going to get it. And Irfan was definitely not one of those people who got it. He
Yeah.
did it, he may have done it 20 times, but every time you would find something different. And
Mm.
that, I think, was due to the fact that he was an observer of life. I think he observed things around him. According to everybody that I've spoken to, everybody says that it was something that was intrinsic to his personality, that he was not outward. He was someone who looked very carefully around him, who would remember you. Years later he would remember, तुमसे मुलाकात हुई थी, तुम्हारा नाम भी कभी कभी उनको याद रहता था. There are people who told me that I met him after so long and he remembered.
Mm.
And I was scared that he would forget, but he remembered. And these are attributes of very evolved personalities. They are people who are observing life all the time, and
Mm.
they are observing
Yeah.
and absorbing at the same time. Mira Nair, in fact, talks about while
Calls
she
him
was
a
shooting.
sponge or something. She calls him a
Yes,
sponge.
yes. No, I think sponge was my word. But I think what Mira was talking about is that it was the first time that he and Tabu were in the US when they were shooting for the namesake. He had never been there before. And she said it was a good thing because Ashok Ganguly had never been to America before.
Mm.
So Irfan brought to that role his new eyes when he was looking at this new country. He was looking at it for the first time. And I think he brought all of that into his character, which I think is absolutely one of the best roles that I've seen. I mean, forget about Indian cinema. I think even internationally, I think that role in that movie is
Yeah.
outstanding.
It
And
is. It
it's
is.
only because of the fact that he observed people. He observed the Bengali, the households in New York. He also was very very clear about how the cadence and the flow and the rhythm of those conversations happened. In fact, sometimes Mira said, I don't know whether it's there in the book, but I think at some point she did say, I think you should just tone it down because we can't understand you. He had got to that point of, internalizing. His wife was the only one who said, I'm not so sure about that. But everyone, I loved what he did. I think he was so good in that movie. And there are some two or three moments in which, especially when he just does a little bit of a sideways nod when Tabu's character is going off on the plane,
Yeah.
and he just that farewell, and that one hand on the telephone booth, he just puts it over there, and that's the last we see of him. I think it's something which will always stay with me. And I was watching everything he had done again, obviously, because I was writing this book. And there were several moments that you forget, because there are, I watch so many movies that, but there are some films, I mean, there are some films and there are some moments that you've never forgotten. I think for me, those were the moments. That one in Maqbool, in Haasil, in a couple of other films, in Kissa, which
In
I think is
Kissa,
another
certainly.
fabulous film. Yeah.
Absolutely fabulous
Yeah.
film. And I loved what Anup Singh said in his conversation with you as well, the sensitivity of him as an actor, because after a very difficult day when he had a spat with his producer, Anup went back to his room, and very
Yes.
late at night, Irfan came and said, "Oh, you can't sleep, even I can't sleep. And so let's just listen to some music." And he'd brought some music of Nusrat Fateh Ali Khan, and they sat all night listening to the music. So Anup says that I was awake. I wanted to sleep and rest, but he wouldn't let me. But this was his way of staying by me on a very difficult evening. So there was a lot of sensitivity there. And also, so many of them have talked about his ear for music. He didn't sing, of course, but he had a great sensitivity about music. And I remember I discussed one of my story ideas with him, which was about a musician, and that alertness with which he would respond to ideas about music, that I found very very touching, and I remember that a lot. But we are moving on. The fact that some people talk about his spiritualism, they talk about his Sufism, they talk about him as a philosopher. Some people in their conversations have done this in your book. And strikingly, Shutapa also talks about the time when he was ill, and she said that it was a difficult time for her to handle it. But for him, it was like he was making friends with his disease and saying, अभी ये आ गया तो चलो बैठ के बातें करते हैं. That's the way he looked at it, that it's here with me, so I will make peace with it. That sort of spirituality, or that sort of, again, as you said, an evolved personality, that alertness, that aloofness about people around him. Do you feel you'd like to say something about that? Because that's where, um, we're looking at a person not just as an actor, but really with an artist's soul.
I would say that I think this whole business about spirituality, about Sufism, about how he was always at one remove from what was happening around him was always part of his persona. It was, but I think it got sharpened when I think the illness came and took over him. Because I at one point of time, Tigmanshu's in his chapter, Tigmanshu talks about how he loved nature so much that there is a lovely instance when he talks about shooting Sahab Bibi or Gangster, and they had gone into a dilapidated fort where there were some beehives, and somebody had put a little bit of I think they had sort of tried to burn them, and many bees had died in that process, and he was very upset. He said, how could you do that? How could you do that? And he was, it brought him to a point of saying, that this is part of me, it is part of
Mm.
nature. You
Mm.
cannot do this. And this is something that all his directors talk about, that wo samne se dikhta nahi tha. He would be here, there, everywhere. Anup talks about him sort of, conversing with something that was beyond. And this was Kissa in 2011,
Yeah.
2012. This is much before his illness had come about. His whole awareness of the other, I think, was very, very high. And I think that was also contributed to him being the actor that he was, where he laid on layers of the awareness of creation that was so complex. So he got all of those things in without actually drawing attention to his craft and saying, look at me, I'm this great actor. He just internalized that whole thing, and he brought it to a point where on screen, where, as Dibakar Banerjee also says, that it was the eye just goes to Irfan. uh, everybody says that when he was on screen, it was hard to look at anyone else.
You've ended almost every interview with your respondents asking how
Yes.
they remember Irfan, or how they're dealing with that loss. And for most of them, it is a personal loss. Some people stop talking, then they come back again, they recover and come back. You also talk about the legacy that he has left, and some of our contemporary actors, some of our best contemporary actors, speak about this. I find this so interesting that some of them didn't ever really meet him, but they keep going back to his work. So when they're asking questions about their own work, also, sometimes a scene from an Irfan film provides them with the answers. I found those very, very touching. This idea that he actually opened a door and he entered, and of course, he made an impact, but he opened the door for many others who followed. And now we have this whole world of OTT series, which is allowing us to look at these alternate actors who would have otherwise inhabited the world of art cinema. They now are the people whom we are looking at every day. So tell us what you assessed about Irfan's legacy.
First of all, I think he banished the idea of an actor being delegated or relegated to a character actor. I think that was very important, because as far as he was concerned, he was playing a character, right? And so what is a character actor? Or what is, somebody who's on the sidelines, and
Hmm.
or the hero is in the middle of the screen? I think he really reversed on a 360 degrees the idea of what a hero can do, or what a hero should do. Let's say that a hero can do only these things. When Irfan became somebody whose stories were being written around, he was the hero of those stories, and he did nothing of the kind that heroes before him had come to do. And we had come to think of heroes doing, as you know, doing the standard thing, like, you know, the 16 and the 17-year-old romances, or the people who became students looking 35 and walking into colleges without a single book in their hand. They did that, and they did the kind of formulaic offerings that Bollywood actually put out. He was central to that change that was going to happen, and that had started to happen, because people, the big guys, were writing roles for Irfan. The big studios was turning their gaze on him and saying, "Okay, this is a guy who can get the people into the theater. So why don't we go bigger with him?" He was at that point after Piku, after with the film that he did with Chujit Sarkar, in which he played with Amitabh Bachchan and Deepika. This is an A-list, as A-list as you can get. And the fact that the film went out so big, it became a huge hit. It was a huge hit, and it changed his whole trajectory around. It changed the way people looked at him, and they looked at a romantic hero. This was a kind of a rom-com where Irfan is the romantic hero. So can you imagine, even 5 years back, something like that happening? It was just impossible. So I think what Irfan did for the Hindi film fraternity is to be able to, it sort of made them a little bit free. It loosened their shackles a bit and said, okay, here I am. I can bring I've done Hindi medium. It's done 100 crore business. I can get them in. Can you give me a story and I will put it out for you? He had got to that point when that very tragic illness came and took hold of him. Yeah. And
Yeah, so he was actually breaking hierarchies, and that's interesting
he was
because
breaking hierarchies, he was breaking silos, he was breaking all kinds of rules that the film industry had lived by, all of these years, these very striated, kind of calcified way of looking at things, that ye to aise hi hoga or aise nahi ho sakta. All of those things that people had done. And that, oh, we need to have a hero who is hatta katta, who is 6 feet tall, who is fair, and all of that. You can only have that as a hero, and not this person who is Irfan. And Irfan was turning that thing on its head and saying, no, look at me. In this sense, he was saying, look at me. I'm right here. Give me a story and I will turn it around for you. And that is what he was doing in all of these other the later films. And the interesting thing is, even when he was not the hero, for example, there's a film called Karma that he does with, toward the end, he did, where he's playing what is usually called the hero's best friend. It's a BFF role in which he's on the side, but when he's there, that's what you are looking at. Is Irfan is taking the film forward in the way that neither the callow hero or the heroine are doing. It's Irfan's character who's the propelling the story forward, and doing what needs to be done in terms of just being able to look at this guy and saying, okay, what is Shaukat going to do now? Ab kya karega ye aadmi? So that is a thing that it's more interesting to me than the romance that is being played out or not being played out in the background, as far as I'm concerned.
So we're coming to the close of this very interesting conversation, Shubhra. Would it be possible that you read a bit from your book?
Yes, I'd love to do that. And I think I will choose something from my introduction.
Yes.
For that. It's like something that I wrote towards the end of the introduction, which is kind of long and detailed, and it talks about the beginning. And I look at his trajectory, and then I look at, in a very sort of a nutshell, I look at what he actually represented in the in Hindi cinema. So this is how I begin. At his peak, Irfan had everything going for him. He had conquered the classy, sexy space and had managed to loosen up enough to get into a pool with a swarm of scantily clad ladies and do a jig. He could carry off pink and pastel, nailing the natty man around town look, and he could get into a pagdi and wear his rumpled grey locks with pride. Versatility is for lesser actors. Irfan literally could do anything he wanted. It took Irfan more than 30 years to get where he did, all through riding the ups and downs, waiting for the right films, and arriving at that point where an Irfan film would become a much awaited event. From that one scene only letter writer who crumples little Chai Pau's letter and throws it away in Salam Bombay, to the loving father who will do anything for his beloved daughter in his last film, Angrezi Medium, Irfan always managed to preserve himself. He did not fritter himself away. He held on to that essential Irfanness, kept nurturing it with support from Sikdar, and opened himself to the roles that needed all of him. I've posed this question to many in the book. Why did it take big budget Bollywood studios so long to find Irfan and give him a tailor made role, and not just expect him to boy the cop and the hood parts they handed out to him routinely? The answers all boil down to this one fact, that mainstream Hindi film industry doesn't make movies for actors. It makes them for stars, and those stars in turn make money for the industry. It's a tight circle which has no place for disruptors, and Irfan indubitably was one.
The fact that Irfan was doing things simultaneously. So while he was getting new openings within India, there were also a lot of calls coming from the West. And he was westward bound. He had offers to even go and settle in LA, but he never did that. He would do his job and he would go back to India, and constantly looking for new stories. For him, the two people that he idolized and emulated and placed on a very high pedestal were Naseeruddin and Om Puri. And in Maqbool, when he was flanked by all this formidable talent, there was Om, there was Nasir, there was Pankaj, and of course the luminous Tabu, he still held his own, and we still noticed that fantastic performance that he delivered. But the fact that he became this international star, the late 90s and the early turn of the century, that was the time when Om Puri also was very big. I mean, it also happened over the course of a few years that he came and he did films every year, sometimes maybe even two British films. So there was a sudden opening, and there were fabulous, fabulous films that he delivered and gave us, both in the UK, of course, in the USA, where he was with some frontline talent. Now, the question that I had for you was that Nasir and Om are both, as I said, formidable talents. One made this journey. His trajectory took him abroad and made him an international star. It's difficult to make a comparison, but both of them could have stepped out. Nasir was the one who was a student of English literature. He used to do English language plays. So he had his foot into that world already. But the success and the trajectory was Om's. What do you think about this journey that was different for the two of them? One became an international star, one didn't.
Okay, so if you ask me about the difference between Om and Nasir in terms of how they approached the roles that they got from the outside, I would say that Om was more able to distill himself and become that part much more than Nasir was. Nasir was at some level always was Nasir. We always were watching a Naseeruddin performance, whereas an Om Puri could be that East End cab driver. Not that he would get that Cockney accent perfectly. He wasn't even trying for that. But something about the way he would approach that role, and he would allow himself to be filled with the essence of that cab driverness, would not be the same as we would see in a Nasir. Nasir would be more, like I said, I'm repeating myself, but I'm saying it in a very sort of, it would be more a Nasir role where he would be more aware of being who he is rather than being the cab driver. And I think in that sense, Irfan was more Om than Nasir was.
Yeah.
And then he was Nasir. And Naseeruddin Shah himself actually talks about this. He says in his interview, he said, I had a very big ego. I would not go and audition. In the way he said it in an extremely sort of amusing manner, that he didn't think Irfan had all of those hang-ups. He said that he would actually probably go and audition, though his own manager in the book said that that had come a point where Irfan didn't have to audition. People were reaching out to him as Irfan Khan. So I think Irfan, of all the people, of all the Indian actors who had tried to become these crossover stars, he had got to the point where no one else had. And despite the fact that we have two top female stars today, we have both Deepika Padukone and Priyanka Chopra, who are got to the point where no one else has in the West, but they are still have a long way to go before they can actually be approached as people who would do the kind of acting or the roles that Irfan had got way before. I mean, after Warrior, he really didn't have anything to prove, and that was really the beginning of his trajectory. He was, in fact, someone who the West had already become aware of much before India had. And while he was doing Life in a Metro, he was doing Pansing Tomar. He was doing a lot of his West roles. At that point of time, he was doing the Jurassic Park movie. He was doing the Michael Winterbottom film that
The
was set in
Spider-Man
Pakistan.
movie.
The Spider-Man film. He was doing in those 4-5 years.
Yeah.
He was doing. And he was doing the kind of tentpole, big budget. Steven Spielberg is bigger than anyone else in the world right now, and if his franchise is reaching out to Irfan, so you can imagine he had already reached a point where no one else really in this country has. So I think internationally, nationally, he was someone that people recognized and people looked out for. And I think the loss of Irfan is something that people are still going to, I mean, people are wrapping their heads around it and trying to figure out who is going to
Who's the
do this
next
role.
one?
Yeah, that guy no longer is here. Who is going to do this role?
And I think in a way it's about negative capability. At the end of it, these are actors we are talking about, and there's a Keatsian negative capability of being not one person or letting your ego take over, but becoming anything else. There's a fluidity. It's
Hmm.
almost like water, that you fill a receptacle the way water would fill it.
Yes and no. I would say that Irfan's awareness of himself was like paramount. He knew exactly who he was. There was never any lessening of that awareness, but he managed to balance that with getting everything in. So I think he did that balance. That in my opinion, I think he did it better than anyone else did.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure, Shubhra.
Thank you.
That was Shubhra Gupta, the author of Irfan, A Life in the Movies, published by Macmillan. In our next show of podcast, My Book, you're going to meet another author along with a book because, as you know, this is a podcast about books and their authors. My Book podcast show has been produced by Parvez Alam and Achula Sharma for Cine Inc., a hub of podcasts based in London. To listen to other episodes of My Book Show, you can visit the Cine Inc. website, www.cineinc.com. Cine Inc. podcasts are also available on Apple, Spotify, Google Podcast, and YouTube. This is Sangeeta Datta signing off. Goodbye.